I am a 30-year-old guy. I grew up in New York City, and I have been traveling probably since I was in my teens. I traveled a couple of times as a very young child, but the very first times I traveled, probably when I was around 13, 14. I remember my first international travel was probably a summer as a teenager when my family was going to a Caribbean. We went to the Dominican Republic. I remember that was my first trip where I had went outside of the country. I'll never forget this because it was probably one of the first experiences where I saw an act of overt racism or bigotry. We were standing in line, and I'll never forget. We were getting breakfast, and we were standing in line, and my aunt, who was traveling with us, who was my complexion. I have to say that my family varies in complexion. And so my mother is originally a Native American. She grew up on a reservation, and so she has a very, very fair-skinned complexion. My father, his origins are in Trinidad and Tobago, and so he shares the complexion of myself. So I was standing in line behind my aunt, who is a complexion of myself, and she was taking time to make toast. There was a woman standing behind her, a white woman, who was visibly frustrated with how much time my aunt was taking. We were on vacation time, and so everyone was moving very slow. And I remember her saying audibly, very loudly, "Jesus, do you want the toast to be as black as you?" And I remember being shocked at that interaction and hearing that, and also having a moment where I had to take the time to understand, what does it mean? And I remember looking at my family, who was in ear range of all of this, and now that I look back at it, I could see them collectively taking the time to figure out their response to this situation, thinking about how they could respond that would be in a helpful, protective way of me as a young mind, because I know they're probably thinking that their son is standing in front of them and they wanted to show a good example of how to handle these interactions, but also watching them guard their anger in a way that was protective, because we knew we were in a foreign place at this time and that any of our actions were weighted with the color of our skin, and we needed to be cognizant of that. And so there were many things in their mind involving protection of their child, probably responding to this bigot, but also making sure that their response, even though it was validated and well-warranted, was safe. And now looking back at that, I can't forget that experience whenever I'm traveling now, thinking about safety, thinking about how I'm perceived, thinking about crimes, thinking about things that I do, and how something that I could do, which would probably be seen as friendly, could be seen as threatening because of how I look. My father is an attorney, and he's a criminal defense attorney, so he deals a lot with race in his life, and he's the kind of man who always brings up race in every situation, no matter how you want it. I remember before I left to go to the Dominican Republic, he sat my brother and I down, and he asked our thoughts and how we thought race was perceived in other countries. And he discussed the racial issues and tensions that existed between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and how many people of color, specifically those of darker complexion, were perceived rather than those of lighter complexion within the race of the Dominican Republic. And I remember hearing that and thinking, like, how can Dominicans perceive each other differently when they both originate as the same culture? And he said, you'd be surprised at how simple the color of the skin changes the demographic, changes the feelings between groups. Many of my peers who also travel are not black, and so my discussions with them sometimes before I go somewhere and they've been before are sometimes ending the awkward question of me saying, but what is it? How do they feel about black people? I think my experience of travel comes with that conversation before I even go anywhere, and it's allowing my friends and my loved ones to realize, oh, maybe your experience might be a little bit different, and then watching a lot of them pause and go, you know what? I'm not really sure, or it's never the, oh, it'll totally be fine. It's always the, I'm not sure, let me get back to you. Before I go anywhere, my mom always stops and she goes, remember, she talks to me like I'm that 14-year-old child again. She goes, remember, if you get frustrated or upset, please do not show people your anger. You're received as something that's a little bit more threatening than your peer who may be white. So if you find yourself in a situation, try to remain calm and just agree. And it's a conversation that happens with me in many of my interactions in America, where I'm from. But definitely I have to sit down and have that conversation even as a grown man with my mother. And so I think having a resource where I can understand truly what it is like to be black in the areas that I'm traveling to is something that I think is valuable and incredibly important.
One more question I have for you.
Yeah.
What do you do for a living?
I'm an emergency physician. I work in New York City. So you would think that I'm well equipped to deal with emergencies, but I'm never equipped to deal with these types.